what your thinking is, because I know you've been doing some around the connection around being a member of a democracy and the civic kind of approach versus what potentially we're seeing right now, which is a lot of closed off, in separate ways of I don't know if there's a lot of transcendent thinking that we're all engaged in when we're locked in our
It's sort of
political stances.
platitude transcendent thinking, right? Which isn't the really like, well, you need to figure out what does it look like here, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean in this situation that's very fraught to believe this, right? And it's easier to just hold the high ground, right? Or to stay in the concrete, like I vote based on an issue. But to be able to actually revise your own beliefs in accordance with learning about new kinds of situations you hadn't heard about before, right? That's the power. And so I think what's really important in education, if we hope to sustain our democratic experiment, right, is that we help kids grow tolerances for uncertainty, for thinking in fraught spaces, for considering multiple perspectives, for querying their own assumptions and perspectives, and for really moving in and out of this space of thinking about the broader, longer term future sustainability implications, the historical contextual implications or insights that those generate into the ways things are happening now, and what all of this means for how I understand the nature of this problem, right, that I'm faced with or that the society is faced with, and helping build a generation of young people who are inclined to engage with themselves and other people in that way is what's essential to the functioning of a democratic society. And we can't pretend that ignoring the issues, not teaching about the history, not engaging with the fraught topics is going to make them go away. And we can't pretend that you can segregate these kinds of issues into and out of particular kinds of contexts. So you can learn about it over here in church, but you can't learn about it over there. You can learn about it at home, but you got to hide that about yourself when you're in history class. Like that is doomed to explode in our faces. And until we get brave about actually querying our own perspectives and building dispositions for engaging in complex discussions, not for necessarily believing, things, changing your own beliefs, but being open to the possibility of it, and appreciating where someone else's beliefs come from and where their needs are from. Like, until we can actually think about our own actions and beliefs in terms of the historical context in which they occur, and in terms of their implications for the future sustainability of a benevolent democracy, we're in danger because we're too much in the here and now and fighting over stuff that has huge historical precedent and historical legacy being played out and huge implications for the sustainability in the future. And we aren't thinking enough about those. We're staying right in the fight right here, right now, just for the principle of it. And that is dangerous. And I think education has a major role to play in really helping kids develop the dispositions and the capacities to be able to think in these spaces in more generative, humble ways.
What do you think? I'm curious. We have this project here in our 8th grade where kids are doing kind of pen pal work over the year with and even got a chance this last year to see each other when they visited DC. One group of kids in more rural Virginia and from a red state kind of area. Or I guess Virginia may be purple, but a reddish area of the state, and here more liberal New York City kids. I mean, what is the kind of like? I think there's a tendency of liberals, including myself, more progressive toward people, to think that like what you're describing, your research is finding, is inherently more liberalizing. I'm saying that I have this belief at times, but help others think, what does this look like from I don't want to just necessarily say conservative, but like, there's places where people are going to do lots of deep and interesting transcendent type of thinking with the kind of concrete and relational pieces that they have in their lives that don't look like what I would just assume is the right way to think about things. Like, what could we expect if people from across a political spectrum or different belief system were actually doing this? Is it ultimately coming back to like grounding things in evidence, which is where my thinking is, like that is a more
Part of
liberalizing.
it, but you can have different kinds of evidence, right? But I mean, fake evidence is never okay. But like, there's
Right.
contradictory evidence. There's true things that these things happen, and also it's true that that happens, right? So how do we reconcile those? I mean, I think the key is, first of all, not for us who identify as more quote unquote socially liberal to take the high ground and think that our views are not evidence-based or not, right? Like, we actually have to be willing to query those beliefs, but also to bring them into a space where you, in an open-minded way, learn about other people's justifications for their beliefs and then query each other's. I mean, there's overwhelming finding that the way that from social sciences, that the ways that you break down problematic tensions is by having people know each other and actually engage with someone who believes something different than yourself and get to appreciate how it is that they have come to believe that, and then to share what you believe with them and to hear each other, right? So I think doing that, this doesn't make us all believe the same thing, but it makes us more disposed toward and normalizes the need for open conversation where we actually engage with each other around the reasoning behind our beliefs. And at the same time, we come to understand our own beliefs more thoroughly. So I don't really understand my beliefs until I've had them challenged, and by someone who disagrees, and I've really thought about why it is that despite those challenges, I maybe still think I'm correct or not, right? But as I engage with that, the process of engaging actually helps you to understand your own beliefs better. It's not just about changing the other person. It's about the depth of understanding. You really, I mean, a silly trite example of this, but it's this kind of idea. When I was an undergraduate, I went to Kenya, right, for a semester and a summer, and was building boats in this very fundamentalist Muslim island off the northern coast of Kenya and all this stuff, and speaking Swahili and doing all these things. What I really learned from that, I learned lots of things, but what I really learned was that I bring a cultural orientation to the world. I had thought, it's like when you hear other people speak, everybody else has an accent, but you just talk normal, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's like when I got there, I realized, like, I have a way of thinking about the world that not everybody shares. Other people had a different way, and they had trouble understanding my logic, right? And I sometimes had trouble understanding theirs. And what it really made me realize is I bring a sort of subjective logic that comes out of my own cultural upbringing, and we all do. That is human. And so being able to query that is the key, not necessarily changing other people's beliefs, but you really don't understand your own beliefs until you've queried them from the perspective of somebody else, and done so seriously, not just in a sort of platitude kind of way.
Yeah, serious would mean, right, like not necessarily just trying to argue to get your point across, right? Or
Yeah,
waiting
but
for
to
that
really
next.
think about them, and but also, I mean, there has to be a common shared understanding that certain kinds of evidence are legitimate evidence, and certain kinds of evidence are purposefully, fraudulently created to stir up dissent and turmoil, and that we can't on either side fall into only looking at the evidence that supports our position. You have to learn to engage with things more broadly than that if you really want to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges I find is, I think about something you told me when we first met, really, which is some of the eye gaze research that you were doing. It's like this idea that, because I find myself doing this often, like staring off into the distance or mid distance, or not, my eyes aren't focused. And I know that my brain is processing something that is not in the here and now. I mean, I don't know that in the moment, but I'm sort of catch
Of course, yeah,
myself.
yeah,
And I think, oh, Mary Helen told me that's what's happening in my brain. But like, to get to a place like that where you're so vehemently, in disagreement with, is really hard to get to a
yeah,
place where you're
it
really
is.
disengaging to think deeply and wonder about something. I find this with people I know very closely in my life who
yeah,
emotionally kind of drive me up the wall,
yeah.
and don't give me the space, or I'm not able to find the space to do that. And I guess that's what I'm struggling with a little bit, is like, you know, that's if that's the shorthand for sort of like the work we need to do around transcendent thinking, is like really being able to do some deep thinking about it. If one of the foundational things of that is that we have to have some shared understanding of what evidence is, that's where we find ourselves arguing, and it's in the here and now, it's in the very concrete, it's in the relational. And that's, I wonder if there's a way we can grow future adults that we have into being in a space where that's actually possible for them, because it doesn't feel possible to me all the time.
No, I think it isn't all the time, and it's also getting, the difficulties are being compounded by things like AI generated evidence. So, where it's just pulling stuff together in the ways that, the digital world can sort of systematically bias conversations and what you see and all that kind of stuff. That's just evil. You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
not you engaging with other people's perspectives. That's somebody else controlling what you see so that you're only capable of having one perspective. And
Yes.
like we have to learn to not fall prey to it. And we also, frankly, probably need laws to manage it, because we have to be able to trust the information we get from somewhere, right?
Well, it'd be great
Because
to
we
have
know.
some laws so that we're also not just distracted wondering whether or not the Pope is actually wearing a Balenciaga or whatever it is coat.
Right, exactly.
That's a
Like, you know
that's a
what I mean? Like
Drake's
that kind
a
of thing.
Drake
We
song.
need to actually, yeah. But uh, there was something else I was going to say about what you're saying too. I mean, you're also highlighting the need for emotional safety, right? Because we have to agree on evidence, but we also have to agree that we are, that like to develop dispositions for sort of exteriorizing our own knowledge and deconstructing it systematically, and then reconstructing it systematically, and thinking about what do we learn from that. And this is that idea of making thinking visible that comes from David Perkins and them at
Mhm.
Project Zero, but it's also something that comes out in this kind of political space where we to be able to kind of exteriorize and in a sense detach yourself from your own beliefs and examine them, query them systematically. To learn to do that takes a certain amount of time, space, disposition, and skill. And we need to build spaces for that, in society and in schools. Schools are in
Yeah.
society, right?